Hey there everyone. Today we're going to learn how to make our own Snapchat filters. Let's get started. Hello there everyone. Welcome to our first episode of The Maker's Guide, a series where we'll explore a bunch of different routes to utilize the skills we learn as programmers and just a way to express what we care about in our lives in a way that's a lot more fun, a lot more creative. So with that, let's go ahead and introduce today's subject. Today we'll be focusing on Lens Studio. Lens Studio is Snapchat's kind of environment for building out lenses or filters for AR, kind of VR, and mainly just filters for faces, so 2D and 3D as well. So with that, let's go ahead and get started and get familiar with what this software is. So to get started, let's go ahead and download, if you already don't have it downloaded, Snapchat Lens Studio. And for the rest of this short series where we focus on Lens Studio, we'll be referring to it as Lens Studio, just to keep things short and simple. So what you'll find is that your file is around 1 gigabyte, and if you have a, let's say in most situations, a laptop and don't have a GPU, you might be relying on the central processing unit alone to run this program. So if you are on a lower end machine, there is a possibility that you might not be able to play around with these filters too much. However, you can still learn from this experience. And if you're afraid you won't be able to follow along, worry not. We won't be focusing just on Lens Studio throughout this series. We'll also be doing Raspberry Pi and 3D modeling, a bunch of other things that we'll be able to use on low spec machines as well. So to begin, let's go ahead and actually look at what we're seeing on our screen once we have Lens Studio installed. So with what we're looking at, we're introduced to a pretty user-friendly interface. Snapchat does a really good job at communicating what you can do, as well as providing tools and ideas for how to be creative. For example, right here on this far left bar, we'll find that they're displaying their documentation. They know that a lot of people aren't familiar with 3D work and want to provide a way for people to come in at a gateway level. So what we'll do is go ahead and interpret all of the material that they have here with us and work through the vital points in manipulating an AR effect, a 3D space, or even just a 2D filter. But for this series, however, I'd highly recommend having both a individual mouse and a keyboard. The reason being, it's a lot easier to navigate a 3D space when you have a left and right click, as well as having control of a certain amount of keys on your keyboard to better navigate the 3D space without a lot of complications that can come out of gestures or just single finger interactions on the mouse pad. So with that, let's go ahead and work off of a template, and specifically one of the most simple methods for interacting with AR, which is just a static 3D object. With a static 3D object, we'll have a 3D object that doesn't move, doesn't have any fancy effects from what we're aware of, and will allow for us to just work with something that's easy to manipulate, easy to bring in, easy to take out. Worst that happens is that we delete it and put it right back in. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So once we log in, we'll open our project, or the template in this instance, we'll find that we're thrown into this view. What we're looking at here is what we consider a 3D viewport in this area in specific. To our right is a preview window, an inspector for a selected object, and here we'll find properties such as the X, Y, Z positioning, what material this is made of, what things we can modify about those materials. On the left, what we'll have is the objects in the scene. So with this, we'll have an overview of everything that's inside of this space of the 3D viewport. And to better explain the 3D viewport, it's essentially just a imaginary area where we, on this grid that we are currently looking at, build a space around whatever our filter is going to be. So we'll have a central point here, which is the view of the person. In a general 3D software, this would be considered a camera, and is actually what it's considered here. So, for example, this box that we're seeing here is what the person would be seeing when they open their app. Alongside that, we also have resources down here in the bottom left. So if we had a collection of resources to work with, we could go ahead and click and drag these into our scene. But without getting too confusing, let's go ahead and just start with start with the navigation of this. Up here, we'll have these different tools to get around this 3D viewport. So, for example, our first tool will be the panning mode. With panning, we can go ahead and click down, and this will allow us to pan and or move in a 2D fashion, where we're essentially dragging just like we would on a MacBook when we're scrolling up and down. Past that, we have our selection tool, and if you'd like, please feel free to write down these shortcut keys, because eventually, if you become proficient in the software, having the shortcut keys will allow you to make and pump out filters at a lot faster of a rate. But this is about being artistic, expressing yourself through your knowledge and skills in programming. So, do what you want. Outside of that, we also have our move tool. With this, we can go ahead and move objects. Here is something that we'll actually find very often in a 3D software. This 3-point system allows for us to move things on the X, Y, and Z axis, allowing for us to control the object in a 3D space. This will also be visible when you actually want to scale an object down, because you could scale that object based on all 3 dimensions instead of just doing a general shrink and grow. So with that, we'll also have our rotation tool. So with this, we'll find our arrows suddenly became an orb. But just like before, we have the red, the blue, and the green to express those 3 different dimensions that we can work with. So, for example, I can go ahead and rotate on the y-axis. I can go ahead and rotate the object on the x-axis. And then I'll undo these. And I can also rotate the object, and I'll make sure to actually grab the trophy on the y-axis again, but I meant to grab the z-axis. So with that, we'll have control of just moving our objects around the general area. After that, we have our scaling tool. So like I had stated earlier, we can scale on multiple dimensions, but there's also just a general little box here that I actually haven't run into too often in other softwares, but can be really useful in this instance, because it allows you to do a general scale up and down, squash, stretch, whatever you'd like to do, and this might come in handy later for animations. But let's go ahead and test out to see if we can scale uniformly. So if we hold shift, it actually doesn't make a difference, but with this we have a way to shrink in any direction we'd like in this 3D space. So let's go ahead and move on to our framing tool, which allows us to modify the framing of our object, as well as a unify tool that allows us to essentially blend tools together. So with that, let's go ahead and actually shift our focus into changing and or modifying what we see in our preview. So for the final part of this video, I'd actually like to showcase the last bit of the interface that actually isn't tied to our desktop. If you have this software running on your laptop, usually this viewport can be nice and can be very useful for previewing your app, but the better and more accurate interface would be to actually use your phone. So, to view the final part of this entire interface we have, let's go ahead and send our lens to our device. So, what I'll make sure to do is go ahead and capture my screen so that you guys can see what's happening on my end of things as well. So, to get started, what I'll do is go ahead and open up Snapchat on my phone, as well as setting up this Snapchat lens. So here we'll find that, as long as the program works, that my Snapchat lens preview is ready. Just like that, all I had to do was sign into my account and it sent it right over for me. So I think if I go over to my, I guess I'll have to do it again. Just 1 second. And I should get a notification, just like that. And with this, I can go ahead and preview the filter just like I have it right there on my screen. So with that, we have our preview of the Snapchat lens interface. Next episode, we'll focus on more of the specifics of our viewport, messing with our objects, and getting to know what types of objects and how to manipulate those objects. So, until then, have a nice week.